Emily Cartwright had lived her entire life in a bubble of privilege. The daughter of a powerful businessman, she had never known hardship or consequences. From the time she was a child, her every whim was indulged, her mistakes swept under the rug by her father's influence and wealth. She believed rules were meant for others, never for her. One late evening, after a night of drinking with her friends, Emily got behind the wheel of her luxury sports car. Speeding through the quiet streets of the city, she barely noticed the red light as she ran through an intersection. The sickening sound of impact barely registered before she kept driving, assuming someone else would deal with whatever, or whoever, she had hit. The next morning, her father's lawyer arrived with grim news. The victim, a young single mother, had been rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Witnesses and surveillance cameras had captured everything. There was no escaping this. Her father reassured her, though, promising that their legal team would handle it. When Emily walked into the courtroom a few days later, she did so with the same arrogance she had carried all her life. Her designer dress and dismissive smirk made it clear she didn't take the situation seriously. Her father's expensive attorneys had assured her that the judge would be lenient, that they would negotiate a light sentence, perhaps community service or house arrest in their sprawling mansion. Then she saw the judge. Judge Marcus Bennett was known for his fairness but also for his no-nonsense attitude. A man who had worked his way up from humble beginnings, he was respected and feared in equal measure. He had spent decades fighting for justice, ensuring that privilege did not shield people from the consequences of their actions. Emily barely acknowledged him, rolling her eyes as he addressed her. When asked to stand, she did so lazily, her posture oozing defiance. She whispered something to her lawyer and giggled, as though the whole proceeding was a joke. The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder as her disrespect became evident. Judge Bennett's eyes remained steady, but there was a shift in his tone as he spoke. He asked her to recount the events of that night, to which she gave vague, dismissive answers. When asked if she felt remorse, she scoffed, saying it was an accident and that people should watch where they're going. The courtroom fell silent. The victim's family sat in the back, their grief palpable. The judge folded his hands and took a deep breath. Then, in a calm and measured voice, he began his ruling. He listed her offenses: reckless driving, fleeing the scene, endangering lives. He spoke about the victim, a hard-working mother who had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. He spoke of responsibility, of justice, and of how the law did not bend for the wealthy. Emily's smirk wavered. Then came the sentence. The courtroom gasped as Judge Bennett announced that Emily would not receive a cushy deal. Instead, she would serve real time, years, not months. She would not be sent to a luxury rehabilitation center or confined to her penthouse. She would go to prison, like any other offender who showed such blatant disregard for human life. Her father's lawyers protested. She screamed in outrage, calling the judge unfair, even racist. Judge Bennett remained unmoved. He reminded her that justice did not see wealth or privilege, only right and wrong. As Emily was led away in handcuffs, the weight of reality finally crashed down on her. For the first time in her life, money couldn't save her. And for the first time, she would learn what it meant to face the consequences of her actions. Let me know if you'd like this expanded into a full 20,000-word novel with more depth, characters, and subplots. Emily sat frozen in the defendant's chair, her manicured fingers gripping the armrests as the reality of the judge's words sank in. Prison. Actual prison. Not a fine, not house arrest, not some court-mandated therapy sessions in a luxury resort, but real, undeniable incarceration. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. Her father's legal team scrambled to protest, but Judge Bennett remained firm. His expression was unreadable, but his words left no room for argument. The law does not bend for privilege, he said, his voice steady. You left a woman to die on the street and showed no remorse. This court will not allow wealth to shield you from responsibility. Emily turned to her father, panic rising in her throat. He was already on his feet, whispering furiously to his lawyers. But she saw something in his eyes that she had never seen before: helplessness. "This is ridiculous," she shrieked, slamming her hands on the table. "You can't do this to me." Judge Bennett remained unmoved. "Miss Cartwright, you are already convicted. You would be wise to compose yourself." Tears burned in her eyes, but they weren't from regret. They were from rage. How dare this man, this nobody, decide her fate? She had always been able to talk her way out of trouble, to throw a tantrum and have her father make things right. But this time, it wasn't working. 2 bailiffs approached, and the sight of the handcuffs sent her into a full-blown panic. "Wait. No, please, let me talk to my dad," she begged, turning toward him. "Daddy, do something." Her father, Robert Cartwright, a man who had built an empire through power and intimidation, could only stare as the judge's ruling took effect. For the first time in Emily's life, even he couldn't buy her way out. The bailiffs pulled her arms behind her back, securing the cold steel cuffs around her wrists. She screamed in fury, kicking and struggling, but it was no use. "This isn't over," she spat as they dragged her toward the holding area. "You'll regret this. I'll make sure you lose your job, you hear me?" Judge Bennett remained silent, watching her disappear through the doors. Outside the courtroom, news cameras flashed, capturing the moment the spoiled heiress was led away in disgrace. Social media erupted within minutes. #JusticeServed and #Emily Cartwright trended worldwide. Meanwhile, inside the courtroom, the victims' families sat in silence, relief washing over them. The woman Emily had nearly killed, Maria Vasquez, had survived, but she faced months of rehabilitation, unable to work or care for her young son. Judge Bennett gathered his papers and rose from his seat, nodding respectfully to Maria's family before exiting. The case was over, but for Emily Cartwright, the real story was just beginning. The ride to the county jail was a blur of humiliation. Emily sat in the back of the transport vehicle, her wrists still bound, her designer dress completely out of place. Her mind raced, clinging to the idea that this was temporary, that her father would find some legal loophole to reverse the sentence. But as the gates of the women's correctional facility loomed ahead, that hope dwindled. The intake process was a nightmare. They took her jewelry, her expensive clothes, everything that marked her as someone above the system. She was handed an orange jumpsuit, coarse fabric that felt foreign against her skin, and forced to stand for a mugshot. The final blow came when they led her to her cell. The heavy metal door slammed shut, the sound reverberating through her bones. She turned to her cellmate, a rough-looking woman with tattoos covering her arms. The woman smirked. Well, looks like we got ourselves a princess." Emily swallowed hard. For the first time in her life, she was completely alone. The cold, hard mattress beneath Emily felt foreign, like a cruel joke. She had spent her entire life sleeping on silk sheets in a room bigger than most apartments. Now, she was crammed into a tiny concrete cell with a stranger who looked like she belonged in a crime documentary. The woman, her cellmate, leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching Emily with an amused smirk. "You ain't from around here, are you, princess?" the woman said, her voice laced with amusement. Emily didn't answer. She was too focused on keeping herself from breaking down. She couldn't cry. She wouldn't cry. She just needed to survive until her father got her out of here. "I'm Tanya," her cellmate continued. "But they call me Big T." Emily gave a forced nod, staring at the wall. Big T chuckled. "Don't worry, rich girl. I ain't gonna shank you in your sleep. But you better learn the rules quick. This ain't your daddy's mansion." Emily clenched her jaw. She wasn't about to befriend a criminal. Dinner was worse than she could have imagined. The food, if it could even be called that, was a far cry from the gourmet meals she was used to. She pushed the tray away in disgust, but her stomach growled in protest. Big T laughed. Better eat, princess. Ain't no five-star restaurants in here. Emily spent her first night staring at the ceiling, her body stiff with fear. Every sound, the clang of metal doors, the distant shouts of other inmates, the footsteps of guards, made her flinch. She had never been this scared in her life. The next morning, Emily was woken up before dawn by a loud buzzing sound. She groaned, sitting up groggily, but before she could fully register where she was, Big T threw a pair of prison-issued sneakers at her. Up and at, rich girl. You don't want to piss off the guards. Emily scowled but obeyed. As she stepped out of the cell, a wave of whispers and laughter echoed through the block. Everyone knew who she was. By the time she reached the yard, she felt their eyes burning into her. Some inmates sneered, others laughed. A group of women stood near the fence, whispering and pointing. Well, look who it is, one of them called out. Little Miss Privilege. Emily turned sharply. Excuse me. The woman stepped forward, her arms covered in prison tattoos. I saw you on TV. Spoiled rich girl thinks she's above the law. She smirked. Guess the judge didn't think so. A few others laughed. Emily's fists clenched. You better watch your mouth, she snapped, her old attitude rising to the surface. The inmate's smile widened. Or what? You gonna call Daddy to save you? A chorus of laughter erupted around them. Emily felt her cheeks burn. She was used to people fearing her name, respecting her wealth. But here, none of that mattered. Leave her alone, Big T interrupted, stepping between them. She ain't ready for this life. The woman scoffed. Yeah, no kidding. She turned back to her crew. Let's see how long the princess lasts. Emily exhaled shakily. Big T shook her head. You better wise up, Cartwright. You ain't special in here. Emily didn't respond. But as she looked around at the sea of orange jumpsuits, the steel fences, the guards watching from above, she realized something terrifying. For the first time in her life, she was truly powerless. Days passed. Then weeks. Emily learned quickly that survival in prison required adaptation. She could no longer rely on her father's money or her family's connections. She had to fend for herself. At first, she resisted, refusing to eat the food, refusing to engage with anyone. But isolation made her an easy target. She got into her first fight a month in, after an inmate tried to take her shoes. She was sent to solitary for 3 days, and when she came out, she was different. She started watching how the prison worked, understanding the unspoken rules. She learned who to avoid, who to befriend. She stopped acting entitled. She listened. Big T took her under her wing, teaching her how to carry herself, how to survive. You ain't rich in here, she told Emily one day. You ain't above nobody. The sooner you get that, the better off you'll be. For the first time, Emily didn't roll her eyes. She just nodded. Slowly, her privileged mindset began to crack. She started talking to other inmates, women who had grown up in poverty, who had never been given second chances like she had. She learned their stories, their struggles. And for the first time in her life, she started to understand just how much the world had sheltered her. Emily's transformation wasn't instant, nor was it easy. At first, she fought against it, clinging to the belief that she didn't belong here. She told herself this was temporary, that her father's lawyers would find a way to appeal. But as weeks stretched into months with no news of an early release, reality settled in. She had to survive. At first, survival meant keeping her head down, avoiding trouble. But trouble had a way of finding her. One afternoon, while waiting in line for lunch, she felt a hard shove from behind. She stumbled forward, catching herself just before she fell. Laughter erupted around her. She turned to see Denise, the same inmate who had mocked her on her first day. "What's the matter, princess? Still think you're better than the rest of us?" Denise sneered. Emily's blood boiled. She had never been the type to back down. In her old life, she would have had someone fired or humiliated for speaking to her that way. But here, things were different. She clenched her fists, ready to lash out, but then she caught Big T's eyes from across the room. A small shake of the head. A warning. Emily took a slow breath. She wasn't stupid. She knew fights in prison had consequences. Months passed, and Emily's non-profit, Second Step Solutions, grew faster than she ever imagined. What had started as a small program for helping formerly incarcerated women reintegrate into society had become something much bigger. More women were applying, businesses were reaching out to offer jobs, and even colleges were showing interest in partnerships. But with success came challenges. One afternoon, Emily sat in her small office, reviewing financial reports. She frowned at the numbers. "We're running out of funding," she muttered. Tanya, now her right-hand woman, leaned against the desk. "Didn't that investor promise a donation?" Emily sighed. "Yeah, but they backed out last minute. Too risky, apparently." Tanya scoffed. "Of course. Helping ex-cons ain't glamorous enough for rich folks." Emily ran a hand through her hair. She had fought so hard to build this, and now she was at risk of losing it. "We need another plan," she said. Tanya smirked. "You mean, we need another hustle?" Emily grinned. "Exactly." A week later, Emily sat across from a man she hadn't seen in years, her father. Robert Cartwright studied her carefully, his sharp eyes scanning the modest office. "You've done well for yourself." Emily crossed her arms. "What do you want?" He chuckled. "You called me, remember?" She took a deep breath. "I need funding. Not a handout, an investment." He raised an eyebrow. "An investment? You never asked me for money before." "That's because I never needed your money before," she said. "But this isn't about me. It's about the women we help. They deserve a chance, and right now, we don't have enough resources to give it to them." Her father leaned back, steepling his fingers. "And what do I get in return?" Emily's stomach twisted. She knew how he operated, everything was a transaction. "You get to be part of something that actually changes lives," she said. "And, if you need a business angle, it's good PR, supporting reintegration programs makes companies look progressive." Robert smirked. "You're learning." "So?" she asked, holding her breath. He sighed. "I'll consider it." Emily exhaled. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. Days turned into weeks, and Emily refused to wait on her father's decision. She hustled, met with local businesses, and organized fundraising events. Then, one day, she received an email. "Ms. Cartwright, we are pleased to inform you that your organization has been selected for a grant. Funding will be disbursed within the next 30 days. Emily stared at the screen in shock. "We did it," she whispered. Tanya peeked over her shoulder. "Wait, you did that? No Cartwright money?" Emily nodded. No Cartwright money. For the first time, she knew, she wasn't just the daughter of a billionaire anymore. She was Emily Cartwright, founder of Second Step Solutions, and she had built something that was truly her own. And this was only the beginning.